All right, you handed us your trickiest real estate concepts, those moments where the answers just didn't quite click. That's exactly why we're here.
Yeah.
We're about to transform those lingering question marks into crystal clear exclamation points, turning those past sticking points into solid aha moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
This isn't just about reviewing material. It's a focused expedition into the heart of California real estate principles and practices, aiming to build your confidence and give you a deeper, more robust understanding from the ground up.
It's truly valuable to approach learning from where the challenges lie. When we revisit these specific areas that gave you pause, it's not just about clarifying a single point.
Right.
It allows us to see how intricately all real estate concepts are woven together. We'll connect those crucial dots for you, share practical insights, and ensure the foundational knowledge you're building is absolutely rock solid.
Let's start where many real estate journeys stumble, right at the very definition of property. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? A piece of land.
It really does.
But in our world, those simple words hide layers of crucial distinctions that, if misunderstood, can really trip you up.
Oh, for sure.
Terms like land, real estate, and real property are often used interchangeably in everyday conversation, but they each have precise legal meanings, and grasping those distinctions is foundational.
You're right. That's an excellent place to lay our groundwork.
Yeah.
When we speak of land, we're not just talking about the surface you walk on. Imagine it as a three-dimensional column.
Okay.
It encompasses the visible natural resources on the surface, the minerals that extend downwards all the way to the center of the earth, and the column of air that goes upwards into infinity above it.
Wow, okay.
So it includes all permanently attached natural features, from the deepest bedrock to the highest airspace. It's a very comprehensive natural concept.
So it's far more than just a flat piece of dirt. It's this immense vertical domain from the core to the sky.
Precisely. Now, when you introduce improvements to that land, you arrive at the definition of real estate.
Oh.
An improvement is any non-natural structure that's been built on or permanently affixed to the land. This could be as obvious as a house, but it also includes things like fences, detached garages, paved driveways, or even large landscaping features that are permanently installed.
Got it.
It's the land plus anything human-made that has
Yeah.
become a fixed part of it.
And then real property takes it even further. This is where the intangible side of ownership, the legal rights, truly comes into play. What's the secret sauce that transforms real estate into real property in a legal sense?
That's where it becomes most powerful from an ownership perspective. Real property is the most comprehensive term because it encompasses the real estate we just defined, the land, and its improvements, plus what's famously known as the bundle of rights associated with ownership.
Bundle of rights.
Think of it like a bundle of sticks, where each stick represents a distinct right. This bundle refers to all the legal powers and privileges an owner possesses over their property. It includes the right of possession. This is your right to occupy and use the property as your own. The right of control. You can decide how the property is used within the boundaries of the law, of course.
Right, zoning and all that.
Exactly. The right of quiet enjoyment. This is your right to possess the property without interference or disturbance from others who might claim a superior title or interest. It's about peaceful possession.
Okay.
The right of exclusion. You can prevent others from using or entering your property without your permission. This is why you can put up no trespassing signs.
It makes sense.
The right to transfer. You have the ability to sell, lease, give away, or even devise, will your property to others. And the right to encumber. This means you can place a lien or mortgage on the property, using it as collateral.
So real property isn't just about the physical thing you can touch. It's truly about the comprehensive set of legal privileges that define ownership. And then there's the broader term property itself, which covers everything.
Yes. Property in its most general sense refers to any item that can be owned. It could be something tangible like a house, a car, or even a bagel. Something you can physically interact with.
Okay.
Or it can be intangible like stocks, intellectual property such as patents and copyrights, or even a right to future income. But for us, in the context of real estate agents, the primary focus is always on conveyance.
Conveyance.
Which is simply the process by which real property legally changes hands, whether from a seller to a buyer or through a lease from a landlord to a tenant.
That distinction really helps clarify the scope. Now, another area where we know you had some questions and where the lines can sometimes blur is distinguishing between real property and personal property.
Oh yeah, this one's classic.
On the surface, it seems straightforward, But then you get those tricky items that seem to transform from one to the other.
It absolutely does, and it's a common point of confusion that has led to many a real estate dispute. Let's make it clear. Real property, as we just outlined, is permanently attached to the land and is typically conveyed through a deed or a will.
Right.
When a property is sold, everything legally defined as real property generally goes along with that sale. A classic example in the natural world is fructus naturalis.
Fructus naturalis.
Yeah, fructus naturalis, which are natural, long-term growing things, like established trees, shrubs, or perennial landscape plantings. Because they're considered permanent, they're real property.
Okay, like an old oak tree.
Exactly. Personal property, on the other hand, is also known as chattel, or personality. It's fundamentally movable and impermanent.
Chattel, right.
It's not permanently affixed to the land and is conveyed by a bill of sale or through bequest in a will, separate from the land itself. Think of your furniture, a car, or your clothes. An interesting real estate example here is fructus industrialis, also known as emblements.
Okay, another Latin-sounding one.
Right, fructus industrialis. These are annually cultivated crops, like a field of corn, wheat, or vegetables. Even though they grow on the land, they are considered personal property because they are intended to be harvested and removed within a year. They aren't permanent parts of the land.
So if I were to buy a farm, the apple orchard would be real property, but the corn growing in the field would be personal property, and the farmer could come back and harvest it.
Precisely. The apple orchard falls under fructus naturalis because it's a perennial, long-term planting. The corn is fructus industrialis because it's cultivated annually with the intent to harvest.
Ah.
This distinction is incredibly important during negotiations and closings as it dictates what truly conveys with the sale.
So always clarify that in the contract.
You got it. Now, imagine an item that starts its life as personal property but then gets bolted down, wired in, or suddenly becomes truly integrated. That's where fixtures come in.
Right, the ceiling fan example.
Exactly. A fixture is an object that began as personal property but has become so firmly attached to the land or a building that it's now considered real property. The process by which this transformation occurs is called affixation or annexation.
Affixation.
A ceiling fan, for instance, is personal property in its box at the store, but once it's professionally installed and wired into a home's electrical system, it typically becomes a fixture.
And the opposite of that, when something that was real property reverts to personal property, is severance, right? Like cutting down that apple tree for firewood.
Exactly. When you cut down that tree, it transitions from being an integral part of the real property to becoming movable, personal property. It's the act of physically separating real property to convert it into personal property.
This can be a real sticking point in transactions. Buyers often assume something stays, and sellers assume it goes. That's where the Maria method comes in handy. It's a brilliant mnemonic to remember the tests used to determine if something is a fixture. Can you walk us through Maria and emphasize which factor often takes precedence?
Absolutely. The Maria method is indeed the forensic toolkit for figuring out what's truly part of the home sale, beyond just what meets the eye. It's not just a checklist. It delves into the story of why something is there.
Okay.
So M is for method of attachment. This asks how permanently the item is attached. Is it bolted, wired, plumbed in, or simply resting on its own weight? The more permanent the installation, the more likely it's a fixture.
Makes sense.
A is for adaptability. How is the item specifically adapted to the real estate? Is it custom built for that particular space, or could it easily be used in any other building? Custom-made drapes for a unique window or a built-in bookshelf would lean towards being fixtures.
Ah, like it belongs there.
Exactly. R is for relationship of the parties. This considers the relationship between the people involved. Are they landlord-tenant, buyer-seller, or lender-borrower? For example, trade fixtures.
Trade fixtures, right.
Like display cases or specialized machinery installed by a tenant for their business are generally considered personal property and can be removed by the tenant, even if firmly attached, because they're essential for their specific trade. This rule often protects tenants' business investments.
Okay, good point.
I is for intent of the parties. This is often the most important factor.
Intent.
What was the intention of the person who installed the item when they put it there? Was it installed with the intent of being a permanent part of the property, or was it meant to be temporary? While often tricky to prove, a seller's disclosure can be invaluable here. For instance, did the seller install that fancy chandelier intending to take it with them or to leave it?
Ah, okay. That's key.
And finally, A is for agreement between the parties. The simplest and most definitive way to avoid disputes is a clear written agreement. If the buyer and seller explicitly agree in writing that a particular item, be it a cherished family chandelier or a specific appliance, is either included or excluded from the sale, that written agreement typically overrides all other tests.
Right. Put it in writing.
Exactly. It clarifies their mutual intent.
So it's not just about whether it's bolted down, but why it's there and what everyone mutually understood or agreed upon. That makes intent and a formal agreement incredibly powerful. Building on that, let's talk about the unique nature of land itself. Beyond just its physical presence, land has some truly special characteristics that set it apart from almost any other commodity we deal with. It's not just another asset, it's distinct.
That's a profound observation that influences every aspect of real estate. Land possesses three primary physical characteristics that fundamentally make it unique.
Okay.
First, indestructibility. Land, as the earth itself, cannot be destroyed. While features on it can certainly change due to natural forces like floods or human intervention like excavation, the landmass, the core essence of the earth, remains.
Right, you can burn down a house, but the land is still there.
Exactly. Second, immobility. This is perhaps the most obvious. Land cannot be moved from one place to another. This seemingly simple fact has profound implications for everything from market values to how we appraise properties and even how communities develop.
Can't pick it up and take it with you.
No. And third, non-homogeneity. Uniqueness. No two parcels of land are exactly alike. Even adjacent plots will have slightly different positions, views, soil compositions, or legal descriptions. This inherent uniqueness is why land is often referred to as a non-fungible commodity.
Non-fungible, like NFTs, but, actual dirt.
Sort of, yeah. You can't simply exchange one piece of land for another and expect it to be identical in every way, unlike, say, two identical barrels of oil.
So you can't just swap 1 acre for another and call it even because each one is inherently different physically. But that's just one side of the coin. What truly dictates its market value, sometimes in surprising ways, are its economic characteristics, the less intuitive forces at play.
Yes, these economic characteristics are vital for understanding market dynamics and a property's true worth. First is fixity. This echoes as physical immobility, but from an economic perspective. The location of land, and usually the improvements built upon it, is fixed.
Right.
This means that economic and social forces around the property directly impact its value.
Location, location, location.
That's a big part of it. Then, illiquidity. Unlike a stock that can be sold in seconds, real estate is not easily converted to cash without a potential loss of value or significant time investment.
Takes time to sell a house.
It does. Selling property involves marketing, negotiations, and transaction costs, making it a relatively illiquid asset. Third, scarcity. Land, particularly desirable land in prime locations, has a limited and finite supply. This inherent scarcity, when combined with high demand, directly drives property values upward.
Makes sense.
And fourth, situs. This is the invisible economic magnetism of a property's location. Situs isn't just where a property sits, it's about the economic significance and desirability of that geographic area due to appealing amenities, features, or proximity to jobs, schools, or services.
So it's more than just location, it's like the economic vibe of the location.
That's a great way to put it. Think of beachfront property. Its high value is largely due to its high situs. Or recall the example of train tracks behind Joe's home. The modification.
That's a new track.
The construction of those tracks. A human-made economic change to the surrounding environment profoundly impacted the situs of Joe's property, causing its value to decrease due to the noise and diminished desirability of that specific location. It perfectly illustrates how economic characteristics are dynamic and affected by external factors.
That Joe's home example really brings it home. It's not just the land itself, but how its location functions economically and how that can fluctuate. Speaking of natural forces, there were some terms here about how land can change physically due to nature, like a river adding or taking away soil. This was another concept that often trips people up. Can you clarify terms like accession, accretion, erosion, and reliction?
Absolutely. These are key nuances
Yeah.
and can get confused easily. Accession is actually the broadest concept here.
Okay.
It refers to the right of an owner to all that their property produces, and importantly, to all that is naturally or by human action added to it. It's an overarching right of ownership to any increase in one's property.
So like extra stuff you get?
Pretty much. Now, accretion is a specific process within accession. It describes the gradual increase in land area through the slow, imperceptible deposit of soil and sediment by natural forces, often from a river or other body of water.
Slow buildup.
Right. Erosion is the opposite of accretion. It's the gradual loss of land over time, often due to water washing away bordering land.
Washing away. Got it.
Reliction is another form of land increase. It describes the gradual increase in land area when water gradually withdraws or recedes, permanently exposing land that was previously submerged.
Like a lake drying up a bit at the edges.
Exactly. And then there's avulsion, which is distinct because it describes a sudden loss or gain of land, often due to a dramatic event like a flood or a river suddenly changing its course.
It's sudden, not gradual.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So accretion and reliction add land, while erosion and avulsion lose land, but accession is the overarching right to any increases or additions to your property.
That clarifies it. Thanks.
You're welcome. Beyond that, we have appurtenances. These are rights or privileges that run with the land,
Run with the land.
meaning they are attached to the property and typically pass with the land when it's sold, automatically transferring to the new owner. They can often be sold separately from the land itself, though.
Ah, okay. Like what?
Well, these include air rights, the rights to the space above your property. These can be sold separately, for example, to allow for the construction of skyscrapers or air bridges over your land.
Interesting.
Water rights. These are complex and determined by state and local laws, and they differentiate between how you can use water from different sources.
Yeah.
Under common law, riparian rights apply to properties bordering flowing bodies of water, like rivers and streams.
Riparian for rivers.
Right. While littoral rights apply to properties bordering still bodies of water, like lakes and seas.
Littoral for lakes. Got it.
Then you have surface rights. These are your rights to use the actual surface of the land. Pretty straightforward. Subsurface rights, also known as mineral rights. These pertain to what's beneath the surface, including oil, gas, and minerals. Holders of subsurface rights generally have priority over surface rights, provided the surface isn't unduly disturbed.
So oil companies basically.
Often, yes. And finally, supporting rights. This is your right to not have your land slide around or collapse because of what a neighbor is doing. This includes lateral support from adjacent properties and subjacent support from below.
Okay, essential stuff. Hashtag 1.3 home foundations and basic construction insights. Now let's bring it back to the practical, tangible aspect of a home structure, specifically the very thing it sits on, the foundation. This is something agents need to have a basic understanding of, as it can be a significant red flag or selling point.
Indeed. The foundation is the critical architectural structure that connects the building to the ground, serving to transfer all the loads from the structure safely down to the earth.
Supports everything.
Exactly. Without a solid foundation, the rest of the house is unstable. The most common types of residential foundations you'll encounter and visually assess are slab-on-grade construction.
Slab.
This is exactly what it sounds like, a concrete slab poured directly on the ground, which then serves as both the foundation and the first floor of the house. It's very common in warmer climates or where frost lines aren't a concern.
Okay.
Then there's the basement. This is a full story, or sometimes a partial story, built completely below ground level. Basements can be finished and used as living space, or left unfinished for storage and utilities.
Pretty common in colder areas.
Right. And then the crawl space. This is a hollow, unfinished space underneath the house, typically situated between the ground and the first floor.
Wow.
It's often just enough room for maintenance access to plumbing and wiring, allowing for ventilation and preventing moisture buildup onto the home.
Right.
As your past study humorously noted, it's often described as just enough room for snakes and raccoons to fit in, certainly not a habitable living space.
Huh. That crawl space visual is pretty memorable. And this naturally leads to an important point for real estate agents: due diligence and visual inspection. How does understanding basic construction relate to an agent's responsibilities during a visual inspection? What are the boundaries?
It's absolutely critical for managing risk and fulfilling your duties.
Yeah.
California law requires both the seller's and buyer's agents to perform a diligent visual inspection of the property.
Both agents, okay.
Yes, this isn't a deep technical inspection akin to what a certified home inspector performs. Instead, agents are looking for red flags, visible, obvious signs of potential defects or issues that a reasonably prudent person would notice.
So obvious stuff.
Exactly. This means you should manually engage with things. Turn on faucets to check for water pressure, flip light switches to see if electricity works, and look for clear, obvious issues like water stains on ceilings, significant cracks in walls, or overt signs of pest infestation.
Okay.
Your fundamental obligation is to disclose any material facts that you should have known through this due diligence, or any facts that are directly known to you.
Right. But what don't you do?
Well, it's equally crucial to understand your professional limits. Agents are not expected, nor are they qualified, to conduct specialized tests. This means you don't test for radon gas or asbestos or lead paint.
Okay, no testing.
Similarly, you are not obligated to investigate or disclose the addresses of sex offenders. Your professional duty there is to alert buyers to the existence of online public registries, such as those maintained under Megan's Law, where they can research this information themselves.
Alert, don't investigate.
Precisely. This distinction is paramount for managing your liability and understanding your professional scope. You're the alert system, not the investigative arm for every single potential hazard.
That sets a very clear boundary for agents. Let's shift our focus now to the core relationship an agent builds, the agency relationship itself. This is where contracts, ethical duties, and compensation truly come into play. It's the backbone of how we interact with clients.
You're absolutely right. This is fundamental to our profession. The first step in formalizing this relationship is typically through a written agreement. A listing agreement is the formal contract signed between a seller and a broker.
Seller and broker.
Right. This agreement is what officially transforms a customer, someone you might be interacting with but don't yet represent, into a client, and it officially establishes the broker as the listing agent, setting out the terms of their employment.
Okay.
Similarly, a buyer representation agreement is the equivalent, but signed between a buyer and a broker.
Buyer and broker.
In California, forms provided by the California Association of Realtors, like the Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement, BRBC, can be used to guarantee agent compensation by checking the applicable box, providing a clear understanding of when and how the buyer's agent will be paid, even if the buyer ultimately finds the property through other means.
So it protects the agent's commission.
Essentially, yes.
And these employment agreements aren't quite like other contracts, are they? I recall a scenario with Broker Al that highlighted something important about their assignability.
That's a crucial point, and it's a common misconception. Employment agreements, including agency agreements like listing or buyer representation contracts, are not assignable by the broker to another broker.
Not assignable, okay.
If Broker Al wants to transfer his client relationship to Broker Stan because Al is retiring, he can't simply hand over the existing agreement. A new agreement would need to be formed directly with the client's consent and with Broker Stan.
Makes sense.
This emphasizes that the client's relationship is inherently with the specific broker, not just the brokerage firm in general. It ensures that the client has chosen and consented to be represented by that particular individual or entity.
That makes perfect sense. It's about that personal trust. Now, another crucial clause that often protects agents' hard work, and which we know caused you some confusion, is the protection period. Can you explain what that is and why it's so vital?
The protection period, sometimes referred to as a safety clause, is a carefully defined time frame that extends after an agency agreement officially ends.
After it ends.
Yes. During this specific period, the agent can still be owed compensation if the property is sold to a buyer they introduced or showed the property to during the original term of the agreement.
Ah, okay.
For instance, in the Buyer Bob example you saw, if you introduce Buyer Bob to a home during your active listing period, and then a week after your listing agreement expired, Bob bought that exact house directly from the seller, you would likely still be eligible for your commission.
I see.
This is contingent on your listing agreement, including such a protection period, and your having provided the seller with Buyer Bob's name as a prospective buyer. It's specifically designed to prevent buyers and sellers from colluding to bypass the agent and cut them out of their earned commission for work already performed.
So it's truly there to safeguard the agent's efforts and investment. Let's look at the different types of listings now, as these also dictate how an agent gets paid and the level of exclusivity.
Indeed, the type of listing fundamentally defines the compensation structure. First, an open listing is the least restrictive and non-exclusive.
Open listing.
Multiple brokers, and even the owner themselves, can actively try to sell the property. With this type, only the broker who is the procuring cause.
Procuring cause, that's the key phrase.
Meaning their efforts were the direct, unbroken link that led to the successful sale gets the commission. If owner Olga finds her own buyer through her own efforts, no commission is owed to any agent under an open listing.
Okay.
Then there's the exclusive authorization and right to sell listing. This is the most common type and is generally preferred by brokers because it offers the most protection.
Right to sell.
With this agreement, the named broker gets the commission, regardless of who ultimately signs the buyer, even if the owner themselves finds the buyer, as in your owner Olga example.
Even if Olga sells it herself.
Even then. This guarantees the broker's compensation for their marketing, time, and efforts, knowing they will be paid if the property sells during the listing period.
Okay, that's strong protection.
Very strong. And finally, a net listing is legal in California but is generally discouraged due to the inherent potential for conflicts of interest.
Net listing. Sounds risky.
It can be. In the net listing, the seller specifies a particular net price they want to receive for the property, and the broker's compensation is any amount over that predetermined net price. This setup can incentivize the broker to sell the property for the absolute highest possible price, potentially above fair market value, solely to maximize their own commission, which may not always align with the seller's best interest.
Yeah, I can see the conflict there. Moving on from the agreements, let's delve into the ethical duties of an agent within these relationships. Presenting offers, for instance, seems like it should be an open and shut case, but it's not always so simple in practice.
It's a core ethical and legal duty that cannot be overstated. Agents must present all offers to their clients as soon as reasonably possible, providing all relevant terms and information.
All offer.
All of them. The client is the only one who has the authority to accept or reject an offer. As we saw in those scenarios with Jim, who only presented what he thought was the best offer, or Fernando, who believed an offer was too low to even show.
Right, those examples.
These actions are fundamentally incorrect and unethical. An agent cannot make that decision for the client unless you have explicit written permission from your client to filter offers, perhaps only presenting those above a certain price. Every offer, no matter how appealing or unappealing it seems to you, must be presented to the client without delay.
This truly highlights the difference between acting as a fiduciary agent, guiding your client, versus trying to be a decider for them. It also brings up the broader distinction between ethics, morals, and laws, which can often overlap but have different origins.
That's a great segue. Laws are typically codified rules enforced by a governmental authority, carrying legal penalties for noncompliance.
Okay, laws from the government.
Right. Ethics are broader standards of conduct, often practiced by a specific group, profession, or culture. They are external and standardized, guiding professional behavior.
Ethics from the profession, like nay.
Exactly. Morals, on the other hand, are internal personal values and beliefs about what is right or wrong, which can vary widely by individual.
Those are personal.
Correct. The key differentiator is that ethics are externally determined and standardized, often setting a baseline for professional conduct, while morals are internal and individual. Realtors, by being members of the National Association of Realtors, commit to adhering to the NAE Code of Ethics, which often sets a higher standard for professional behavior than the law alone requires.
Higher standard.
However, if there's ever a direct conflict between the Code of Ethics and the law always takes precedence.
Law wins. Got it.
So the Code of Ethics is a guiding principle, pushing realtors to a higher standard of conduct than mere legal compliance. Article 15 of that code is quite specific about professional interactions, isn't it?
Article 15.
Yes. Article 15 of the NAR Code of Ethics is very clear. It explicitly prohibits realtors from knowingly or recklessly making false or misleading statements about other real estate professionals or their businesses.
Don't badmouth other agents.
Basically, yes. This article is designed to foster professional respect and prevent unfair or malicious competitive practices within the industry. We also saw an example with Richard, where an appraiser's fee was made contingent on the property's appraised value. This directly violates the ethical principle in Article 114, which states an appraiser's fee must be independent of the valuation, as such practices create a clear and unacceptable conflict of interest.
Right, the appraiser fee example, that's a clear line in the sand. And finally, on the topic of an agent's duties, let's re-emphasize disclosures. What is an agent truly obligated to disclose to a client, and perhaps just as importantly, what are they not obligated to disclose, even if it might seem relevant to a buyer? This was another point that needed specific clarification for you.
Agents have a very clear and critical obligation to disclose material facts. These are facts that, if known, could reasonably influence a buyer's decision regarding the property.
Material facts. Key term.
Definitely. This includes facts they should have known through their due diligence, visual inspection, or facts that are directly known to them. For example, if Agent Lula visually observes an obvious crack in the foundation or clear signs of water damage, that constitutes a material fact that must be disclosed. They must also disclose proximity to public, private, or military airports due to noise or flight path considerations.
Report noise, right.
However, it's vital to remember your limitations and legal boundaries. Agents are not obligated to investigate or disclose the precise addresses of sex offenders, nor should they actively search for this information.
Okay, the Megan's Law point again.
Exactly. Instead, their obligation is to alert buyers to the existence of online public registries, such as those established under Megan's Law, where individuals can conduct their own research on sex offender locations. This distinction ensures agents provide necessary information about available resources without overstepping their professional boundaries or potentially violating privacy concerns related to protected classes. It's about empowering the buyer, not doing the investigation for them. Hashtag tag 2.2 California regulatory environment and unlicensed activities.
That distinction really helps in navigating the complexities of disclosures. Let's move now to the bigger picture of oversight. In California, the real estate industry isn't self-regulated. It's governed by a specific, powerful body.
Yes, in California, the California Department of Real Estate, DRE, serves as the primary regulatory authority.
The DRE.
Its mission is two-pronged. Firstly, to vigilantly regulate and monitor the real estate industry, to protect the public's interest in all transactions, ensuring fair and ethical practices.
Protect the public.
And secondly, it aims to efficiently provide essential services related to licensing, the oversight of subdivisions, and addressing consumer needs.
What are some of the key powers and responsibilities the DRE has to achieve these goals? They sound like they have quite a bit of reach.
The DRE indeed possesses broad and significant powers. They are responsible for approving real estate education providers and courses, administering real estate licensing exams, issuing and renewing licenses, and enforcing the real estate law.
So education and licensing.
Right. They actively investigate complaints filed against licensees, and they have the authority to take formal disciplinary action. They also manage the Consumer Recovery Account, which compensates consumers who have suffered financial loss due to the fraudulent or dishonest actions of licensee.
Recovery account, okay.
Furthermore, the DRE enforces subdivision laws to protect buyers in new developments, manages funds for real estate education and research, and monitors mortgage broker activity within the state. The Real Estate Commissioner, who is appointed by the governor, is the head of the DRE and is empowered to create and enforce policies, as well as conduct formal hearings for licensees and license applicants.
So the commissioner heads it up, and what kind of disciplinary actions can they actually hand down to licensees? It sounds like they have pretty significant teeth.
The disciplinary actions the DRE can impose are quite serious and are designed to protect the public and maintain industry standards. They have the power to refuse to grant a license to an applicant, restrict an existing license, which might limit what a licensee can do, suspend a license temporarily, or even permanently revoke a license, effectively ending a person's ability to practice real estate.
Revoke. Wow.
Yeah. They can also impose financial penalties, which can be up to $2,500 per investigation, depending on the severity of the violation.
This level of oversight is clearly crucial for consumer protection and maintaining professional standards. Now, let's talk about what activities require a real estate license versus those that explicitly do not. This is a common area of confusion, especially when it comes to the role of assistants.
This distinction is incredibly important to avoid engaging in the unauthorized practice of real estate, which carries severe penalties. A real estate license is required for anyone who performs or attempts to perform acts like selling, purchasing, listing, negotiating the exchange or lease of real estate, collecting rent, or seeking borrowers or lenders for lien-secured loans.
The core activities.
Exactly. And crucially, this applies to the expectation of receiving compensation.
Ah, the money part.
Right. However, there are specific, well-defined exemptions where a license is not required. For example, you generally don't need a license if you are selling, purchasing, or leasing real estate strictly on your own behalf, unless you are engaged in a pattern of frequent buying or selling.
Like flipping houses constantly.
Yeah, typically defined as 8 or more sales contracts annually. Other exemptions include acting solely under a power of attorney for a specific transaction, performing duties as an attorney at law as part of their legal practice, or acting as a court-appointed fiduciary, like a receiver, trustee, administrator, executor, or guardian.
Okay, specific roles.
Also, resident managers of apartment complexes typically have limited duties that don't require a license. Employees of corporations dealing with property owned or leased by their employer, lending institution employees acting within their scope, limited auctioneer functions for real property, federal agency loan servicers, and even owners of cemetery land and agricultural associations also fall under specific exemptions.
So quite a few exceptions.
And this is exactly where the role of the unlicensed assistant often gets blurry. What precisely can an unlicensed assistant do, and what are their absolute restrictions? This was a point that needed careful clarification for you.
Yeah, the unlicensed assistant. What's the line?
This is a critical distinction that many new licensees or aspiring agents struggle with. An unlicensed assistant is primarily hired to perform clerical, bookkeeping, accounting, and other general administrative support duties.
Admin stuff.
Right. They absolutely cannot perform any act that legally requires a real estate license. For instance, in the Sandra example, Sandra, an unlicensed assistant, should not have shown an apartment unit to a potential tenant.
Showing property needs a license.
Exactly. That activity showing a property to a prospective client requires a license because it involves direct interaction and potentially influences the transaction.
Okay, but what can they do?
Well, an unlicensed assistant is permitted to place welcome signs at an open house, schedule appointments between a broker and a client, or meet home inspectors or appraisers at a property to open the door for them.
Logistics, basically.
Yes. These are considered purely administrative tasks that don't involve direct negotiation, advice, or showing properties in a sales-oriented capacity. The rule of thumb to remember is, if it involves direct interaction with prospective clients about the property's features, discussing terms, or performing actions that are part of the negotiation or sale itself, it requires a license. If it's purely clerical or logistical, it generally does not.
That provides a very clear line in the sand, helping to avoid legal missteps. And on a related note, there are specific rules in California about who needs a contractor's license for construction work, which can sometimes come up in disclosures of property improvements.
Yes, that's another important regulatory boundary. Under California's contractor's state license law, any individual or entity performing the work of a contractor for projects exceeding $500 in total value, including both labor and materials, is legally required to be licensed by the contractor's state license board.
Over $500 needs a license.
Right. So as we saw in the Jeremy example, his $50,000 kitchen renovation project absolutely requires him to hold a valid contractor's license. There are a few specific exceptions, however. Homeowners doing their own work on their own property, jobs where the total value is under $500, and certain types of agricultural work, oil and gas operations, or public utility work.
Let's shift our focus now to how property value is determined. This isn't just about what someone eventually pays for a property. It's a much more complex interplay of factors, often less obvious than they appear.
You're right. At its core, for a property to have value in the market, it generally must possess 4 specific characteristics of value, often remembered by the easy acronym DUST.
DUST. Okay, what does it stand for?
D is for demand. There must be a desire or need for the property, and crucially, that desire must be backed by actual purchasing power. People want the property, and they can afford it.
Demand. Got it.
U is for utility. The property must be able to be used for a desired function or purpose. A residential house has utility as a dwelling, while a commercial building has utility as a place of business.
Utility. Usefulness.
Right. S is for scarcity. The property, or its type, must be in limited supply relative to demand. Land, especially desirable land, is inherently scarce, and this limitation helps drive its value.
Scarcity. Makes sense.
And T is for transferability. The property must be legally capable of being sold or conveyed from one owner to another. If there are legal impediments to its transfer, its value is significantly diminished.
Transferability. Okay, DUST. And just to clarify, because this was a common misconception for her, the D in DUST stands for demand, not durability. Durability is a physical characteristic, but demand is what truly drives market value in this framework.
Precisely. Demand is the spark that ignites market activity. So we have this concept of value, but how does that differ from price and cost? These 3 terms are so often used interchangeably, but they each have distinct meanings in real estate.
They are indeed distinct, and understanding the nuances is key for any real estate professional. Can you break those down?
Sure. Value, specifically market value, is a theoretical concept. It's the most probable price a property will sell for in an open competitive market under typical arm's length conditions.
Ideal conditions.
Right, where both the buyer and seller are well-informed, acting prudently, and neither is under undue pressure to buy or sell. It's an educated estimate of worth.
Okay, value is theoretical.
Then, price is the actual amount of money a buyer pays and a seller accepts for a property in a specific completed transaction. It's the observed financial exchange that has occurred.
Price is what actually happened.
Exactly. And cost is the literal amount of money required to buy, build, or develop something. It simply reflects the expenditures made, not necessarily what the market is willing to pay for it or its intrinsic worth.
Cost is just the expense.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So value is what it should sell for, price
Mm.
is what it did sell for, and cost is what it took to create. And all of this is heavily influenced by the fundamental economic principle of supply and demand. Absolutely. This is the invisible hand of the market. When demand for real estate is low and supply is high, meaning there are many properties available, but few interested in qualified buyers, you can reliably expect property values to fall.
Buyer's market.
Right. The market becomes a buyer's market. Conversely, when demand is high and supply is low, with many buyers competing for limited properties, property values naturally rise. It's a dynamic and constant balancing act that dictates market trends.
I'm often fascinated by how unique characteristics or combinations of properties can create extra value. This is where assemblage and plottage come in, terms that can be a bit confusing. For example, if Sarah wants to buy a home and the vacant corner lot next to it, which term best describes the act of combining those properties?
Sarah's engaged in assemblage.
Assemblage.
Assemblage is simply the act of physically combining two or more contiguous touching plots of land into a single, larger parcel.
Just putting them together.
Right. The strategic goal of assemblage is often to create plottage.
Ah, plottage.
Plottage is the resulting increase in the overall value of the larger combined parcel compared to the sum of the individual parcel's values. This increase in value occurs because the larger assembled parcel might now have a higher and better use than the smaller individual ones did separately, or it might allow for more efficient development.
So the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. So assemblage is the act of combining, and plottage is the added value that potentially arises from that successful combination.
Okay, with those fundamental principles in mind, let's dive into the three primary approaches professional appraisers use to estimate a property's value. Understanding when to use each one is crucial, as they're not interchangeable.
Indeed, mastering these three approaches is a cornerstone of valuation. First, the sales comparison approach.
Sales comparison, looking at comps.
Exactly. It's based on the fundamental principle that a property's value is strongly influenced by what comparable properties have recently sold for in the same local market. Appraisers heavily rely on this method, particularly for appraising owner-occupied residential properties and vacant land.
Because there are lots of sales.
Right, because these types of properties are frequently bought and sold, providing a robust pool of recent sales data. This is also the primary method real estate agents use when they prepare comparative market analyses, CMAs, for their clients.
CMAs, yeah.
This approach is underpinned by two core principles. The principle of substitution, which states that a buyer will pay no more for a property than the cost of acquiring a comparable substitute that offers similar utility.
Won't overpay if there's something similar cheaper.
Right. And the principle of contribution, which means that an improvement's worth is what it adds to the property's overall market value, not necessarily its original cost.
What value does that pool really add?
Exactly.
So if I want to know what my house is worth, an appraiser is mostly going to look at what other similar houses just sold for. But no two houses are exactly alike. How do they adjust for those differences, like if one has an extra bathroom or a nicer view?
That's the art and science of it. Appraisers make meticulous adjustments to the comparable properties, the comps, to account for differences between them and the subject property. The goal is to make the comps more like the subject property.
Adjust the comp, not the subject.
Correct. For instance, if comp A has 4 bedrooms and 2 baths and recently sold for $350,000, and comp B has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths and sold for $325,000, the $25,000 difference in price can often be attributed to the market value of that extra bedroom. So you can estimate a bedroom in that area is worth around $25,000.
Okay, finding the value of features.
Right. Now, if you have a comp that's a 5-bedroom, 2-bath home that sold for $330,000, but your subject property is a 4-bedroom, 2-bath home, you would adjust the comp down by the value of 1 bedroom. If, based on other comps, a bedroom is valued at $12,000 in your specific area, you would subtract $12,000 from the comp's price, giving you an adjusted price of $318,000.
Subtracting $12K because the comp is better.
Exactly. It's all about bringing the comparables into a direct apples-to-apples comparison frame with your subject property.
That calculation makes it very concrete. Now, the cost approach is quite different, often used when there aren't many direct sales comps available. How does that method work, and when is it most appropriate?
The cost approach, sometimes referred to as the summation approach, estimates a property's current market value by determining how much it would cost to replace the building with one of similar utility, or to reproduce it as an exact replica.
Replace or reproduce.
From that estimated cost, you then subtract any accumulated depreciation that has occurred over time And finally, you add the current market value of the land itself. The formula is straightforward. Reproduction or replacement, cost accumulated depreciation, plus land value, property value.
Cost minus depreciation plus land. Okay.
This approach is best suited for new construction, where there's no depreciation yet, or for highly unique, specialized, or historical buildings like museums, schools, churches, or public libraries, where finding truly comparable sales is exceptionally difficult.
Unique buildings. New buildings.
Right. It's generally not the primary method used for most residential appraisals because the sales comparison approach is typically more accurate and efficient for those properties.
So if a building is brand new or truly one of a kind with no direct market comparisons, the cost approach is the way to go. What about that term depreciation? How do I calculate that in appraisal, and what are its different forms?
Depreciation in appraisal refers to a reduction in a property's value for any reason. It's crucial because without accounting for it, you'd be comparing an older, worn property to the cost of a brand new one.
Okay.
It's very important to remember that land itself does not depreciate, only the improvements built on it do.
Land doesn't depreciate. Big point.
Huge point. There are three main types of depreciation. First, physical deterioration. This is the wear and tear that results from everyday use, age, and exposure to the elements, or from a lack of proper maintenance. It can be curable, like a leaky roof or worn-out carpet, or incurable, like significant foundation settling that's too costly to fix.
Fixable or not fixable wear and tear.
Right. Second, functional obsolescence. This is a loss of value due to a property's design or features being outdated, inefficient, or less desirable compared to current market standards.
Outdated design.
Think of a 5-bedroom house with only one bathroom, or a kitchen layout that no longer meets modern preferences. This too can be curable, for example, remodeling an outdated bathroom, or incurable, an extremely awkward floor plan that's impossible to alter significantly.
Fixable or not fixable design flaws.
You got it. Third, external economic obsolescence. This is a loss of value caused by negative forces outside the property itself, forces that are typically beyond the owner's control.
Outside forces, like the train tracks.
Exactly like the train tracks example. Other examples include a decline in the neighborhood, increased noise pollution from a new highway, or a change in zoning that negatively impacts the property's use. This type of depreciation is almost always considered incurable by the property owner.
Can't fix the neighborhood yourself.
Pretty much. To calculate depreciation using the straight line or age life method, you use the formula.
Effective age of property at a Fibonacci life. Depreciation percentage.
Age divided by total life. Yes. For example, if a property is 20 years old and has 30 years of remaining economic life, its total useful life is 20 plus 30 equals 50 years. The depreciation percentage would be 2050 equals 0.4 or 40%.
Okay, 40% depreciation.
If the reproduction cost was $375,000, then the depreciation amount is $375,000.4 equals $150,000. If we then add the land value of $140,625, the calculation is $375,000 reproduction cost, $150,000 depreciation, plus $140,625 land value, $365,625 property value.
That's a clear process for assessing that loss of value over time. Finally, we have the income approach. When is this the go-to method for valuation?
The income approach, also known as the income capitalization approach, is primarily used for income-producing properties.
Rentals, commercial building.
Exactly.
Oh.
It appraises real estate based on the income it is expected to generate for an investor. This method is typically used for commercial buildings, shopping centers, large apartment complexes, and any property where the primary value drivers are the rental income or profits it can generate.
Makes sense.
It's supported by the principle of anticipation, which states that a property's present value is significantly affected by the anticipated future income or utility it is expected to provide to its owner.
Value based on future income.
Right. The core of this approach is the IRV formula. Net operating income, I or capitalization rate, R, value V.
I divided by R equals V IRV.
IRV. This formula allows appraisers to convert the income stream into a property value. To arrive at the net operating income, NOI, you first calculate the potential gross income, PGI.
PGMX, possible rent.
Correct. The total rental income the property would generate if it were 100% leased with no vacancies. Then, from the PGI, you subtract vacancy costs and add any other income the property generates, like laundry machine fees or parking revenue, to arrive at the effective gross income, EGI.
EGI is PGI minus vacancy plus other income.
You got it. It's crucial to understand that EGI is the total annual income after accounting for expected vacancy and collection losses, but before deducting any operating expenses. This distinction was a point of confusion before, so remember EGI is what the property actually takes in from all sources.
So EGI is the top-line revenue after accounting for empty units or unpaid rent, not necessarily what it profits.
Exactly. Then, to get to the net operating income, NOI, you subtract all permissible operating expenses from the EGI.
NOI is EGI minus operating expenses.
Right. And it's vital to remember that operating expenses do not include debt service, such as mortgage payments, which are financing costs, or replacement reserves, funds set aside for future large capital expenditures. These are separate financial considerations that don't fall under day-to-day operating costs.
No mortgage payments and operating expenses. Got it.
Let's quickly walk through an EGI calculation to show the process. For a property like Aang Heights, we would calculate the potential gross income from all units at 100% occupancy. Then, you account for a 5% vacancy rate, subtracting that potential lost income. Finally, you add in any additional income, like the $3,000 from other sources. When you apply this process to the numbers you've encountered, this leads to an effective gross income, EGI, of $459,000.
Okay, that calculation path makes sense. And crucially, why doesn't this income approach work for a standard owner-occupied residential property, something like a typical single-family home? This was another concept that often trips people up.
The simple and direct reason is that the income approach only works for income-producing properties. An owner-occupied home doesn't generate rental income, so there is no income stream to capitalize or convert into a value.
No income approach.
That's the bottom line. For those properties, you would almost always rely on the sales comparison approach.
That really clarifies the best use for each appraisal approach. The sales comparison for typical homes, the cost approach for new or unique buildings, and the income approach for properties generating revenue for an investor. Hashtag tag 3.3 Property Management Essentials. Beyond just valuing properties, the ongoing day-to-day management of investments, particularly rental properties, is another specialized area where real estate principles are applied. It's a completely different side of the business.
Absolutely. A property manager is essentially an individual or a company hired by a property owner to handle the comprehensive day-to-day operations of a property, especially rental properties.
Runs the property for the owner.
Right. Their primary objectives are twofold: to realize the highest possible financial return on the owner's investment, and simultaneously to enhance and preserve the property's overall value over time.
Make money and keep it nice.
Pretty much. Their duties are extensive and multifaceted, covering marketing.
Finding tenants.
Yes, this involves crafting effective marketing plans, conducting market analyses to set competitive rents, budgeting for advertising, and evaluating the cost-effectiveness of various advertising channels per prospective tenant. Then there's tenant management and law.
Dealing with tenants legally.
This is a huge and often complex area. It includes meticulously evaluating prospective tenants using standard applications, screening for creditworthiness, and, critically, adhering strictly to all fair housing laws. The Fair Employment and Housing Act, FEA, for instance, explicitly prohibits discrimination based on protected classes in housing. Property managers absolutely must not discriminate in any aspect of tenant selection or property management.
No discrimination.
Crucial.
Absolutely. Also, rent collection. This involves ensuring the timely collection of rent, managing rent rolls, which detail unit numbers, tenant identities, lease terms, and monthly income, and swiftly addressing delinquencies.
Getting the rent paid. And maintenance. This falls into three crucial categories. Routine maintenance, regular everyday tasks like cleaning common areas or changing air filters. Corrective maintenance, repairs performed after something breaks, like fixing a leaky faucet or a broken appliance. And preventative maintenance, proactive, periodic inspections and upkeep designed to catch minor issues before they escalate into major, costly problems, such as checking HVAC systems annually.
Routine fixing and preventing problems.
Right. And finally, financial concepts. Property managers are deeply involved in the property's financial health. This requires a solid grasp of concepts like potential gross income, PGI, which is the maximum income if all units were 100% leased.
PGI again.
Then, effective gross income, EGI, which is the total annual income after accounting for expected vacancy and collection losses, but before deducting any operating expenses, a crucial distinction for you to clarify.
EGI, income after vacancy before expenses.
Exactly. And finally, net operating income, NOI, which is EGI minus all legitimate operating expenses. They also manage capital expenditures.
CapEx, big improvement.
Right. Significant expenses incurred to improve the property or extend its life, often variable and separate from daily operating costs. And of course, they create and manage various budgets, such as a 1-year operating budget for anticipated annual income and expenses, and a 5-year stabilized budget for long-term financial planning.
The distinction between EGI and NOI, especially regarding what constitutes an expense, seems like an important one to nail down.
Yes, it's vital. EGI gives you the actual income the property generates after accounting for lost rent. NOI then gives you the income the property profits after also accounting for the day-to-day costs of keeping it running. It paints a much clearer picture of the property's true profitability and efficiency.
And what about the legal side of things, specifically landlord-tenant law? There are some very particular rules, including how evictions work, that are often misunderstood.
Landlord-tenant law is a comprehensive body of rules governing this unique relationship, and it's essential for property managers to navigate it carefully. A key legal process here, one that was a point of confusion for you, is the unlawful detainer action.
Unlawful detainer, the eviction lawsuit.
Exactly. This is the formal legal proceeding a landlord initiates in court to evict a tenant, typically for reasons like non-payment of rent, violating specific provisions of the lease, or failing to vacate the premises after proper notice has been given. It is the specific legal pathway for eviction.
Okay.
Other crucial aspects include the implied warranty of habitability,
Implied warranty.
which is the landlord's non-waivable obligation to ensure the rental property remains safe and livable throughout the tenancy. Also, regarding security deposits, in California, they cannot be designated as non-refundable cleaning deposits.
No non-refundable cleaning fees.
Right. As of July 1st, 2024, the maximum security deposit a landlord can demand is 1 month's rent. The landlord then has a strict legal time frame of 3 weeks, 21 calendar days, from the tenant vacating to return any portion of the security deposit not legitimately used for repairs or unpaid rent.
3 weeks to return the deposit, got it. And what specific disclosures are landlords required to provide to tenants in California? The list seems quite extensive.
Landlords in California have several key required disclosures to ensure tenants are fully informed. These include disclosing known hazards like lead-based paint for properties built before 1978 and asbestos.
Lead and asbestos.
They must disclose if the property was ever used for methamphetamine manufacturing and the cause of death of a prior tenant within the last 3 years, though notably, no disclosure for AIDS-related deaths is permitted.
Death disclosure with exceptions.
Right. They must also alert tenants to the sex offender database, Megan's Law, any pesticides used on the property, proximity to military bases due to noise, whether the building is a condo conversion, if demolition permits have been issued, and if the property is located in specific flood zones or very high fire hazard areas.
Wow, that's a lot to disclose.
It is. Full transparency is key.
Lastly, let's touch on the different types of leases based on how rent is paid, particularly clarifying the difference between a gross lease and other net leases, which was another area where you had some difficulty.
Absolutely. The way rent is structured significantly impacts who bears the financial responsibility for a property's ongoing costs. A gross lease is perhaps the most straightforward.
Gross lease, simple rent.
Right. In this arrangement, the tenant pays a fixed monthly rent, and the landlord covers all of the property's operating expenses, such as property taxes, building insurance, and maintenance costs. This is what most residential leases are, a single, predictable payment for the tenant. This is where the previous confusion often lay. It's the landlord who shoulders all the operating expense burdens.
Landlord pays expenses in gross lease. Okay.
Then, a net lease is different because it shifts some or all of the operating expenses onto the tenant, in addition to their base rent.
Tenant pays some expenses in net lease.
Exactly. This category can be broken down further. A single net lease, or end lease, means the tenant pays a base rent plus one specific property expense, most commonly property taxes.
Single net or rent plus taxes.
Usually. A double net lease, or NN lease, means the tenant pays base rent plus 2 property expenses, typically property taxes and building insurance.
Double net equals rent plus taxes plus insurance.
Correct. A triple net lease, or NNN lease, is the most comprehensive for the tenant, meaning they pay a base rent plus property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs.
Triple net plus rent plus taxes plus insurance plus maintenance. Tenant pays almost everything.
Essentially, yes. The key difference from a gross lease is that in a net lease, The tenant is explicitly responsible for some or all of the operating expenses, in addition to their base rent.
Got it.
Other common types include a percentage lease, often seen in retail, where the tenant pays a base rent plus a percentage of their gross business profits.
Retail leases.
And a step-up lease, where the base rental rate is set to increase at predetermined intervals over the lease term.
This brings us squarely to the legal backbone of almost every single real estate transaction, contracts. Understanding what makes a contract legally valid, how it can be enforced, or how it might terminate is absolutely fundamental to protecting your clients and yourself.
It is indeed. Let's start with the 5 essential elements of a valid contract. For a contract to be legally binding and enforceable, all 5 of these elements must be present.
5 elements. Okay, what are they?
1. Mutual assent. This is often referred to as the meeting of the minds.
Meeting of the minds, offer and acceptance.
Exactly. It means there must be a clear, unambiguous offer made by one party and an equally clear, unconditional acceptance by the other. Both parties must fully understand and agree to the exact same terms and conditions without reservation.
Okay, 2.
2. Consideration. Something of value must be exchanged by each party to the contract. This isn't necessarily money. It could be a promise to do something, a promise not to do something, or the exchange of goods or services.
Something valuable exchanged.
Right. It demonstrates the party's serious intent to be bound by the agreement. While earnest money is often put down by a buyer in real estate, showing good faith, it is not legally required for the contract itself to be valid. The mutual promise to buy and sell is sufficient consideration.
Earnest money not required for validity.
Yep.
Okay. 3.
3. Legally confident parties. All individuals entering into the contract must have the legal capacity to do so. This means they must have reached the age of majority, which is 18 in California, and possess mental competency, meaning they understand the nature and consequences of their actions.
Adults, sound mind.
Yes. A contract entered into by a minor, for instance, is voidable by the minor. They have the option to disaffirm, cancel it, within a reasonable time after turning 18, or choose to ratify.
Voidable by the minor. Okay. 4.
4. Reality of consent. This element ensures that the contract was entered into freely and voluntarily, with all parties having full and accurate information. If consent is obtained under duress, threats, undue influence, fraud, or misrepresentation, the contract is voidable by the injured party.
Voidable again, not void.
Correct. This was a point that previously caused some difficulty, so remember that it's voidable by the party who was wronged, not necessarily void from the outset.
Got it. And 5.
5. Lawful objective. The purpose or objective of the contract must be legal and not violate any laws or public policy. You cannot have a legally enforceable contract that requires illegal activities or aims to achieve an unlawful purpose.
Can't have a contract to do something illegal. Makes sense. That distinction between void and voidable is perfectly clarified. So once a contract is created, how do we categorize its legal status and enforceability? There are generally 4 legal categories.
That's right. Understanding these categories is key to assessing a contract's standing. First, a valid contract has all 5 essential elements present and is legally binding and fully obligates performance from all parties.
Valid. Good to go.
Second, a void contract is one that, from the very beginning, lacks legal or binding force. It has no legal effect whatsoever, as if it never existed. This is another point of previous confusion, so remember, void from the start, it was never a contract.
Void never existed legally.
Third, a voidable contract is potentially valid, but one of the parties have the option to either perform the contract, enforce it, or void, cancel it. As we just discussed, a contract entered under duress, fraud, or by a minor is typically voidable by the injured or protected party.
Voidable. Choice to cancel.
Fourth, an unenforceable contract is a contract that is technically valid, it has all 5 elements, but for some reason it cannot be enforced in a court of law. This often happens because it doesn't meet certain technical legal requirements, such as those imposed by the statute of frauds or the statute of limitations.
Unenforceable.
Yeah.
Valid, but court won't help.
Exactly.
Speaking of the statute of frauds, this is a really important one for real estate, as it dictates what needs to be in writing. What does it require in California?
The statute of frauds is a legal requirement that mandates certain types of contracts must be in writing and signed by the party to be charged, the party against whom enforcement is sought, to be legally enforceable.
Must be in writing.
For certain types, yes. In California real estate, this typically includes agreements that, by their terms, cannot be completed within 1 year from the date they are made.
Over a year needs writing.
Right. Leases of real property for a term of more than 1 year.
Leases over a year need writing.
And agreements for the transfer of any interest in real property itself, including sales contracts and mortgages.
Real estate sales need writing.
Definitely. So, for example, if you recall the specific question about a 9-month lease from your practice questions, it does not have to be in writing to be enforceable because its term is less than 1 year. This was a key area of previous confusion for many.
That's a crucial detail that can trip people up. A 9-month lease can be oral. And then there's the statute of limitations, which sets time limits for legal action.
Yes, the statute of limitations establishes specific time limits within which a legal action must be brought after a cause of action arises. If you miss that window, you lose your right to sue.
Time limit to sue.
Correct. For example, in California, legal actions based on oral contracts typically have a 2-year limit. Actions based on fraud generally have a 3-year limit, and actions based on written contracts usually have a 4-year limit from the date of the alleged breach.
Different times for different issues.
Right. And if a plaintiff waits an unreasonable amount of time to bring a claim, even within the statute of limitations, a court might use the doctrine of laches to bar the claim, which relies on the court's discretion and whether the delay has prejudiced the other party.
Laches. Waited too long.
Basically. Finally, the parole evidence rule is also important. It dictates that oral evidence, parole evidence, can be used to explain or support a written contract, but it cannot be used to contradict the clear, unambiguous terms of a written contract. The written word generally takes precedence.
Oral evidence can't contradict the writing. Okay. Hashtag 4.2 offers, counteroffers, and the purchase contract. With the contract basics covered, let's move into the actual negotiation process in a real estate transaction, starting with offers and counteroffers. This is often the most dynamic, fast-paced, and sometimes nerve-wracking part of any deal.
You're absolutely right. This is where the excitement and complexity truly begin. The dance starts with an offer made by an offerer, the person making the offer, to an offeree, the person receiving it.
Offer makes, offeree receives.
Right. Once an offer is made, the offeree has 4 distinct choices. They can accept it as is, they can counter it, they can reject it outright, or they can simply ignore it. Acceptance must be unconditional and communicated to the offerer. Every term and condition in the original offer must be agreed to without alteration.
Acceptance must be exact.
Exactly.
What happens when an offeree changes something in that original offer? That's when a counteroffer comes into play, and this was another point that previously caused confusion for you. How does it affect the original offer?
A counteroffer is critical because it fundamentally modifies the original offer, and very importantly, it is legally considered a rejection of that original offer.
Rejects the original offer. Wow.
Yes. The original offer effectively dies the moment a counteroffer is made. So if a seller sends a counteroffer to one buyer and then later receives a better offer from a different buyer, the seller must withdraw the first counteroffer before accepting the new one.
Must withdraw the first counter.
Okay. Also, and this is where previous confusion often arose, while a counteroffer is pending, the property remains available and is not yet officially under contract. The seller is free to continue marketing the property and accept a different offer until a clear, unconditional acceptance of a specific offer is communicated and received. This protects the seller from being bound by multiple offers simultaneously.
So even if the seller sends a counter, the property isn't off the market until there's a clear accepted agreement. That's a big takeaway. And what about multiple offers? That's a very common scenario in California's competitive markets. How does a seller typically navigate that?
In California, when a seller is fortunate enough to receive multiple offers, the seller multiple counteroffer, SMCO form, often provided by SIR, is commonly used.
SMCO form.
It's crucial for both agents and buyers to understand that this is not a first-to-sign situation where the first buyer to return a signed counteroffer wins.
Not first come, first served.
No. Instead, the seller can send out counteroffers to multiple buyers simultaneously. For a counteroffer to become legally binding, the seller must re-sign the form after a buyer accepts it, and then the buyer must receive that re-signed form from the seller. It emphasizes the need for clear communication and confirmation of mutual assent on both sides before a binding contract is formed.
Seller has to re-sign after buyer accepts. Key step.
Very key.
When can an offer be withdrawn and by whom?
An offer, the person who made the offer, can withdraw their offer at any time before their offer has been formally accepted and that acceptance is being communicated back to them.
Before acceptance is communicated.
Right. Even if an offer has an explicit expiration date, it can be pulled by the offer before that date if it hasn't yet been accepted. The power lies with the offerer until acceptance is complete.
Okay. Now let's talk about the central document in this entire process, the purchase contract. What's its ultimate purpose, and what are its truly essential elements required for enforceability?
The purchase contract is the absolute blueprint for the entire real estate transaction. It meticulously outlines all the responsibilities of the parties involved, defines the terms of the sale, and sets the roadmap for the closing process.
The roadmap for the deal.
Exactly. In California, while the state does not mandate a specific standardized form for purchase contracts, the California Association of Realtors, Residential Purchase Agreement, and Joint Escrow Instructions, RPA, is overwhelmingly the most commonly used form by realtors.
The CAR RPA form.
That's the one you'll see most often.
Who actually writes these complex contracts? It's not the agent, correct? This is a crucial ethical boundary.
That's a critical legal distinction you've hit on. Lawyers draft these comprehensive contract forms. As a real estate agent, your specific role is to fill in the blanks of these pre-prepared contracts with the business terms negotiated by your clients.
Fill in the blanks.
Right. You absolutely cannot draft or significantly alter the legal language of the contract itself, as that would constitute the unauthorized practice of law. Your role is to explain the meaning of factual statements or the business implications of various clauses, but you must not give legal advice. That is the exclusive domain of an attorney.
So, fill in the blanks, don't give legal advice. What are the absolute bare minimum elements required for a purchase contract to be considered legally enforceable in California? What can't you do without?
The California Supreme Court has identified only 3 truly essential elements that must be present for a purchase contract to be legally enforceable.
Just 3, okay.
1. The clear identities of the seller and buyer, including their full legal names. Recalling the Billy Bob Snorton example, his full, proper legal name is essential.
The parties.
2. A clear and unambiguous description of the property being transferred.
What the property is.
And 3. The specific purchase price.
How much it costs.
Exactly. While all the other elements typically found in a purchase contract are customary and vitally important for a smooth and comprehensive transaction, these 3 are the core legal requirements for enforceability.
Let's quickly highlight some other key provisions commonly found in the CAR RPA. For instance, earnest money. This was another area of confusion. Is it required for a valid contract?
No. Earnest money is not required for the validity of a contract in California.
Not required. Okay.
It's a deposit made by the buyer, typically held in escrow, to demonstrate their good faith and seriousness about their offer. While it's customary and certainly makes an offer more attractive to a seller, the contract's legal validity doesn't actually hinge on its presence. The mutual promises in the contract are sufficient consideration.
Good faith money, but not essential for validity.
Correct.
What about contingencies? These provisions can truly make or break a deal and dictate the buyer's protection. I recall a specific question you had about how an appraisal contingency affects an offer in a competitive market.
Contingencies are powerful provisions that make the performance of the contract conditional upon the occurrence of a stated event or the satisfaction of a specific condition.
If this happens, conditions.
Right. Common examples include a financing contingency, buyer must secure a loan, an inspection contingency, buyer must be satisfied with the property's condition, or a sale of other property contingency.
Yeah.
In a highly competitive market, including an appraisal contingency, actually makes an offer less attractive to a seller because it introduces a significant condition and thus uncertainty.
Less attractive with appraisal contingency.
Okay, it means the deal could fall through if the property doesn't appraise for at least the agreed-upon purchase price, adding risk for the seller. And a key California-specific detail is that formal contingency removal forms are legally required to lift these conditions and move forward with the sale.
Need forms to remove contingencies.
Yes, absolutely.
So generally speaking, fewer contingencies can make an offer much stronger in a hot market. What about the as-is clause? Does that absolve a seller of all responsibility for defects? This was also a point of previous confusion.
Absolutely not. While an as-is clause means the buyer accepts the property in its present visible condition, the seller must still disclose any known material facts about the property that could affect its value or desirability.
Still have to disclose known problems.
Yes. This clause does not protect a seller who fails to disclose known defects. Sellers are legally liable for failing to disclose any significant issues they are aware of. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for non-disclosure.
As-is isn't a magic shield for sellers.
Got it.
And when disputes unfortunately arise, what's the default approach for resolution as outlined in the RPA?
The KRRPA's default mechanism for dispute resolution is mediation.
Mediation first.
Yes. The parties agree to engage in mediation, a non-binding process with a neutral third party facilitating discussion for any dispute or claim arising from the contract before resorting to more formal and costly measures like arbitration or court action. Mediation is an automatic first step, aiming to find a mutually acceptable resolution outside of litigation, and this is another point that previously caused some difficulty.
Try mediation before suing. Okay. That's a proactive approach to resolving issues without immediate litigation. What about situations where one party defaults? Can a buyer, for instance, force a seller to actually sell the house?
Yes, in California, buyers of real property can generally pursue specific performance.
Specific performance, force the sale.
Right. This is a powerful legal remedy that compels the defaulting party to actually perform the terms of the contract, in this case, forcing the seller to sell the house as agreed. This remedy is available to buyers because every parcel of real property is considered unique in the eyes of the law, and monetary damages alone may not fully compensate a buyer for the loss of a specific desired property.
Because land is unique.
Exactly. For sellers, their primary remedy for a buyer's default, unless liquidated damages were specifically agreed upon, is generally to sue for damages, not to compel the buyer to purchase the property through specific performance.
So a buyer can compel a sale, but a seller's options for compelling a purchase are different. And if liquidated damages are agreed upon in the contract, what's the financial limit for a buyer's default on a residential property in California?
If a liquidated damages clause is specifically stipulated and agreed upon in the contract for a buyer's default on a 1 to 4 unit dwelling, where the buyer intends to occupy one of the units, the seller can retain no more than 3% of the purchase price as damages.
Max 3% liquidated damages for buyer default?
Correct. Any amount collected over that 3% must be promptly returned to the buyer. This cap is a consumer protection measure.
Lastly, a seemingly small detail that's actually quite important for proper contract management. What's the difference between an amendment and an addendum? This was another point of previous confusion that I want to clear up.
It's crucial for clear, legally sound paperwork. An amendment is a document used to change or modify an already agreed-upon contract.
The amendment changes existing terms.
Right. For example, if the parties want to change the closing date, adjust the purchase price, or modify any other existing term after the original contract has been signed, that would be done with an amendment. It alters what was already there.
Okay.
An addendum, on the other hand, adds supplementary information or new terms to a completed contract.
Yeah.
It introduces new material or clarifies existing terms without directly altering previously agreed upon provisions. Think of it as appending a new chapter to an existing book.
Addendum adds new stuff. Amendment changes old stuff. Got it. Hashtag TechTed 4.3, contract termination, and landlord-tenant law. So we've talked about forming and modifying contracts. Now let's explore how contracts, once established, can be brought to an end or discharged. There are various ways a contract can conclude.
Contracts can be discharged or terminated in 2 main categories.
Yeah.
By operation of law or by an act of the parties.
Law versus parties' actions.
Right. Operation of law refers to instances where the law dictates the termination of the contract, regardless of the parties' explicit desires or actions. Examples include the expiration of the contract term, the bankruptcy of one of the parties, or the destruction or extinction of the subject matter of the contract, like the property being completely destroyed by a natural disaster.
Law ends it automatically sometimes.
Yes. Act of the parties means the termination results from the deliberate intent or actions of at least one of the parties. This category includes full performance, both parties fulfilling all obligations, mutual rescission, where both parties agree to cancel the contract and return to their original positions as if it never existed, novation, replacing an existing contract with a completely new one, assignment, transferring rights and obligations to a third party, and importantly, revocation.
Revocation.
Revocation is when a principal terminates an agent's authority. It is indeed an act of the parties that discharges the agency agreement. And this was a point that previously caused some difficulty for you.
Revocation is an act of the parties. Okay. What happens to a contract if one of the parties dies or becomes incapacitated? That seems like it would automatically terminate things.
That's a common and understandable assumption, but generally, the death or incapacity of a party does not relieve their contractual obligations unless it's a highly personal services contract, where only that specific individual can perform the service.
Death usually doesn't end the contract.
Usually not for standard real estate contracts. As we saw in the Manuel and Julia example, if Julia, a party to a standard real estate contract, dies, Her estate typically assumes her obligations under that contract. The contract doesn't just dissolve, it binds the estate.
The estate takes over. Okay. Let's circle back to disclosures one more time, but specifically those that can affect contract termination or property value, and where there's often nuance or prior confusion. The real estate transfer disclosure statement, TDS, for example.
In California, sellers of residential property are legally required to provide a real estate transfer disclosure statement, TDS, which discloses known material facts and defects about the property.
The TDS.
Big one, very big. If this disclosure is delivered to the buyer, after the buyer has already made an offer and signed the purchase agreement, the buyer has a specific statutory right to cancel their purchase agreement within a limited time frame.
Right. To cancel if TDS is late.
Yes. The time frame for cancellation depends on the method of delivery. If the TDS is delivered in person, the buyer has 3 days to cancel. If it is delivered electronically or by mail, they have 5 days. This specific distinction between 3 and 5 days for physical versus electronic mail delivery after the offer and during the contingency period was another previous point that caused some difficulty for you.
3 days in person, 5 days by mail. Got it. So the delivery method can definitely impact that critical cancellation period. What about natural hazards?
Sellers are also obligated to provide a natural hazards disclosure statement, NHD. This document informs buyers if the property is located within various statutorily defined hazard zones, such as flood zones, very high fire hazard severity zones, wildland fire areas, earthquake fault zones, seismic hazard zones, or commercial environmental hazard zones. For instance, if Arnab's property is located near an earthquake fault zone, he would be required to provide an NHD to potential buyers.
Disclosing flood, fire, earthquake zones.
Okay.
And environmental hazards beyond that. Lead paint, radon, Megan's Law. There's often confusion about what agents must disclose versus what buyers must research themselves.
For homes built before 1978, federal law, specifically Title X, requires sellers to disclose any known lead-based paint hazards and provide a lead-based paint pamphlet. So for a 1964 house, this disclosure is absolutely required.
Pre-1978 needs lead disclosure.
Yes. Regarding radon gas, a crucial detail to remember that was previously confusing is that this naturally occurring radioactive gas can often enter a home through cracks in the foundation or other openings in the basement or crawl space.
Radon through foundation cracks.
Right. While agents should alert buyers to potential environmental hazards, they are not expected to perform these specialized tests themselves. And as we've reinforced regarding Megan's Law, which is a federal law establishing state sex offender registries and public access to that information, as an agent, you are not obligated to proactively disclose specific sex offender addresses.
Alert, don't disclose addresses.
Exactly. Instead, your duty is to alert buyers to the existence of the online registry, where they can conduct their own research if they have concerns. This protects both the buyer's right to information and the agent from legal issues arising from disclosing sensitive personal data beyond their scope.
So it really boils down to providing the tools and resources for the buyer to do their own due diligence on those specific sensitive issues. Finally, the concept of stigmatized properties. These aren't about physical defects, but can still impact value.
Stigmatized properties are those with suppressed market value, not due to physical defects, but because of events that have occurred on the property or perceptions associated with it that are psychologically impactful.
Like a death or murder on site.
Yes, or even suspected paranormal activity. While the law might not always explicitly require disclosure of every such event, license holders are ethically and professionally obligated to disclose these facts if they believe those facts would materially affect the value of the property or a buyer's decision. This requires careful judgment and a deep understanding of market perception in that specific area.
Disclose if it affects value. Okay, and that brings us full circle back to landlord-tenant law, which we touched on earlier. Just to reinforce, the unlawful detainer action is specifically what process?
To reiterate and cement this point, an unlawful detainer action is the precise legal process a landlord initiates in court to formally evict a tenant. This typically occurs for reasons such as non-payment of rent, violating specific terms of the lease agreement, or failing to vacate the premises after receiving proper legal notice. It is the landlord's official legal pathway to regain possession of the property. #outro.
We've truly covered a remarkable amount of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? From the fundamental definitions of land and property to the intricate nuances of contracts and agency relationships, and even the practicalities of property valuation and ongoing management.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Rebuilding your understanding around these specific concepts, those precise spots where you had lingering questions or found yourself tripped up, is truly the most direct and effective way to solidify your overall knowledge base. Each clarity gained strengthens the whole.
Absolutely. The real estate world is dynamic and constantly evolving, and a deep, clear understanding of these foundational principles, especially in the areas where you've identified a challenge, isn't just about passing an exam.
Right.
It's about building a robust, adaptable framework for ethical, effective, and confident practice throughout your entire career. Consider how revisiting these sticking points can illuminate the interconnectedness of all real estate concepts, preparing you not just for the test, but for a rich and informed professional journey ahead.
Thank you for sharing your learning goals with us and allowing us to craft this custom deep dive just for you. We genuinely hope this has provided the clarity, confidence, and those crucial aha moments you were looking for. Keep learning, keep exploring, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.